Good morning and welcome to our Bible study this week. This week we look at another commandment, honoring your parents.
Yep. Speaking of parents, we have a mission project this week. Boy, that's a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We have a mission project for September that involves donating or giving money to Clarity for newborn diapers. They have a shortage on newborn diapers. So if you have any newborn diapers I would like to give to this mission project, you can bring them by the office here and drop them off. You could give a donation here to the office, or you can take them directly to Clarity. That's our mission project, our Bible study mission project for September, is newborn baby diapers for Clarity. And let's get started in this wonderful lesson we have, Phil.
It is a good lesson.
Yes, it is.
Stephen Armstrong was an auditor for the state.
Okay.
Not the state auditor now. He was an auditor for the state. He was one of the guys that actually went in and audited county accounts and records.
Okay.
And in the course of his career, he moved 20 times.
Ooh.
Over the course of his career. And in that time, they raised 3 children. And Stephen, of course, you know, if you move that long and that many times, you think, how would your kids ever get consistency?
Right.
We see it, you know, with kids that come in and off a post at
Yes.
Fort Knox.
Yes.
And it would have to be difficult. But Stephen was a good father, and he got his children involved in different activities. One of his sons turned out to be an Eagle Scout.
Takes a lot of time.
That son developed an interest in rocketry, aeronautics, and that son was the first man to walk on the moon.
Okay.
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong. All right. Didn't know that.
Neil Armstrong honored his parents and the commitment that he made to family with his life. Stephen Armstrong, you start talking about him, nobody knows who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. Sometimes you go through life, and it's not that we're put here to do any great big thing, but in our lives we do big things. They matter a lot. So many people get hung up on controversies or spats that they've had with their parents, and they don't honor them. They become disenchanted with the relationship, and sometimes part company, you know, one with another. And in today's study, it shows, you know, what happens when that type of thing occurs too. I'm thankful to have had my parents. I'm a child of Russell Fulkerson and Ann Fulkerson, and they're not perfect, but they were perfect for me. The writer of the lesson, I got tickled because I could hear these same words that he heard. He said his dad would ruin many a Saturday night.
Yeah.
Because as he walked out the door, he would say, "Now don't forget, you're in Evans." And as he did that, you know, it kind of put him back in his shell a little bit and remind him of the responsibility that we all have to live a Christian life and not always act on impulse. But the lesson starts out today with the commandment, and it's a good lesson for us.
Yep.
There's a whole lot to it.
It sure is. Let's get into it.
All right.
Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. This is the first commandment that tells how we relate to other people rather than God.
Yeah.
It's also it's the fifth overall commandment. And it says, honor your father and your mother so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Very simple, Phil. Honor your father and your mother. But there's a lot there. First, let's look at what actually means to honor our parents. It means respect them, show respect for them by the respect they deserve, by valuing what they do and caring for them and spending time with them. It talks about emotional honor, spending time with them. I know that you almost every Friday night spend time with your mother, and I'm sure you do other times during the week also, but that's a time you have set aside to spend with your mother. That's great. Both my parents are gone, both Judy's parents are gone. When they were alive, we spent time with them, but you've got a time set aside, and I can guarantee you she looks forward to that more than anything the rest of the week, of spending that time with her.
I don't know about that.
I'm sure she does.
She stuck with me.
So we spend time emotionally with them. We show them that we generally are concerned about them and love them. A verbal honor, we speak highly of them. We should speak highly of our parents. Now, we're going to talk in a minute, Phil, about what happens when that's not the case. And in so many situations today, that's not the case. Our parents maybe don't deserve the respect that we should show them. We got verbal honor. We speak highly of them. We talk about the things they've done in our life, how they've influenced us. Phil, we can honor them even when they're gone by talking to our grandchildren about how our parents affected our life. Mm-hmm. And we need to try to do that. And then it finally talks about a financial honor, taking care of them when they can no longer take care of themselves. That's something that God wants us to do. And let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, and see what Paul wrote to Timothy about this very thing. Chapter 5, verse 8, he says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So Paul thought it was important enough to write that, gosh, if you don't take care of your household, your family, your parents, that you're worse than someone who doesn't believe in Christ at all. But Phil, is you and I are both grandparents now. We've moved past the parent stage into the grandparent stage. What's our responsibility in this situation as parents and as grandparents?
Well, when we speak of those that are gone, I think it's important to bring out the good qualities and the lessons that you've been taught, that you've received over the years, the principles. You know, God designed the family as the foundation unit in society.
Exactly.
And you don't need to look any further than that right there, and you can see the problems in these big cities.
Yes. There is
The breakup of the family,
there is no family unit.
has waylaid this country far more than any other economic or social issue that has hit since in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And
we have people who don't even know their children, aren't involved with them whatsoever, and that is a big problem in today's society. So it's our parents' responsibility and us to protect and care for our children. Mm-hmm. We don't see that so much today. To love and care for them. What about to discipline them?
Absolutely.
That's something
comes with a stick, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I think it does.
One of the things, Phil, that our parents did, that I'm sure you and I both will say was one of the biggest things that happened in our life, they took us to church. On Sunday morning, you knew where you were going to be. Not because, well, in some cases they forced you to go, you didn't want to go. But that was a great influence on our life.
It is, and it's a responsibility. You know, we shared last week how it's important to pass from one generation to the next, and that's part of it right there.
And the writer said something about we should exemplify Christ to them, live Christ in front of them. You do that by taking them to church with you on Sundays, living a Christ-like life in front of them.
And you know, so many people get hung up on that. so many kids of parents get hung up on that. Well, that's not a Christian way. Well, they're not practicing what they preach.
Mhm.
People aren't perfect.
No.
Every one of us fail, but yet they get hung up on that and then disassociate and think they're justified in doing it. What do you think God thinks? You think he thinks they're justified in doing it?
No, God does not think it. God knows we're not perfect. He knows we're going to mess up. He accepts us back.
You know, in the old times, parents were the primary teachers. They didn't have school, you know,
Right,
as
right.
such, public schools. They were the teachers.
Well, what if parents don't do the things we've talked about? Love their children, care for them, provide for them, protect them, exemplify Christ, take them to church. What if parents don't do these things, but rather, as we see in today's society, how many weeks go by that you don't hear about somebody abusing a child? And most of the time, a lot of times, it's a parent neglecting them. We see that all the time of children not getting the nourishment they need, not getting the love they need, not getting those things that children have to have. They're unloving to their children. They don't care about their children. Does this command give us an out for that
No.
kind of behavior?
No, it doesn't.
It does not. It doesn't say honor your parents or if they're good. Honor your mother and your father. Regardless of how they treat us, they still brought us into the world, right?
It may be that you honor them with a lifetime of forgiveness for them, you know, working towards in yourself and doing what you do, finding a pathway to forgive, you know, for the abuse.
I think the writer, I'm sure it was in, I don't remember which book it was in, said that he knew of a family who had a alcoholic father. One son became an alcoholic. The other son didn't drink anything at all. He honored his father's memory by not drinking. He saw what it did to his dad. He took one path, his brother took the other path. But we can honor our parents even though they're not good to us, even though they don't protect us, are not around us.
And so many times today, this day and time, we see parents doing their own thing and doing for themselves, buying for themselves, indebting themselves for their own pleasure. You see it more and more.
Yeah.
Everything's about self, and it's not about the children.
And what's going to happen to the next generation, Phil, and the next generation? It talks here about that you may have a long life. The opposite of that's true too. If we don't honor our parents and then our children see us not honoring our parents, they don't honor their parents, that becomes a detriment to the family, to society, not just the family, to the national society.
But that command doesn't end when we get to be adults.
No. The writer talks about is exactly what you said. We honor them by forgiving them, by saying, we know you haven't treated us fairly, but you're our parents. We're still going to forgive you for what we've done. But you don't stay in that situation. It's kind of like, Phil, when you're in an abusive marriage. The Bible talks about divorce not being good, but it also tells us we shouldn't have to live in a situation that's abusive to us.
Right.
And that's the same thing with parents. Now, you can't leave your parents when you're younger, but you can get away from that situation when you become of age, but yet forgive them in your heart for what they've done. And that's one of the hardest things that the Bible asks us to do is to love our enemies and hate those and forgive those who despitefully use us. But we see a perfect example of Christ when he was on the cross.
Yeah.
And even though it is difficult at times, that's what we have to strive to do. And it's the same way when we're in a situation with our parents.
That's a good point.
We got to forgive them
Yep.
and move on. it says here about long life. So, Phil, as long as we honor our mother and father, we're gonna, as individuals, we're gonna have a long life. Then it's not that what that means, is it? It's talking about as a nation, as an individual, as a nation itself. If our children will honor their parents, it will lead to the society being a better society, a better place to live, and things going better for the whole nation, as the nation as a whole.
Yeah.
We talked something about that last week, about when we honor God and we're a holy nation, then we won't, I guess what we're talking about, we won't commit the sins of our parents because we're honoring God, and we'll.
Well, look in the big cities.
Help me out here, Phil.
Well, look in the big cities. It talks about long life in the land.
Yeah.
What's the average
It depends on what.
age expectancy of someone, living in that type of environment where there is no family structure, where there is no guidance or little guidance. Maybe a parent's a drug addict, or maybe a parent's addled with other problems.
Yeah.
And you look there, what's the age expectancy? Is it like that of a person with two parents that are honorable? And
No.
It's nowhere near it.
The guidance is not there, the spiritual guidance is not there, and their life expectancy is very low in some of those cases because of the situation they're living in. So we got to make sure that let's look at an example, Phil, in the Old Testament of someone who did not honor his parents.
Well, we have David again.
Yeah, we got
David was one of David's downfalls was that he had several wives.
Yeah.
And it was
Not that wives are bad, Phil.
one at a time.
One at a time.
It was permissible
It was permissible.
under their,
Yes.
but that
yes.
doesn't mean it was the best thing.
Right.
I believe it's man and a woman,
That's what God.
that's what God intends.
ordained. Yes.
But we'll look at something that happened here with David. Now, if you recall, he had his sin with Bathsheba,
Right.
but he also would marry wives to kingdoms,
Yes.
from kingdoms around him,
Yes.
to keep the peace.
Yes.
And I don't know how you pronounce her name. Is it Maraka or Makara? I don't rightly know how you pronounce
Yeah, I
her
think that's
name,
close.
but that was the wife who produced Absalom,
Mhm.
and also Tamar.
Right.
So David had before we get into this, he had a family tragedy to occur, and Tamar was raped by her half-brother Amnon,
Mm-hmm.
and
Another one of David's sons.
another
who-
one of David's
from
sons by another wife.
Right.
And so it was a big blow up, and Absalom wound up killing Amnon.
Mhm.
So let's look at the scripture. It says, when 4 years had passed, Absalom said to the king, please let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow when I lived in Geshur of Aram, saying, if the Lord really brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron. Go in peace, the king said to him. So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent agents throughout the tribes of Israel with this message. When you hear the sound of the ram's horn, you are to say, Absalom has become king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They had been invited and were going innocently, for they did not know the whole situation. While he was offering the sacrifices, Absalom sent for David's advisor, Ahithophel,
Yeah, that's a good one.
the Gilonite from the city of Gilo. So the conspiracy grew strong, and the people supporting Absalom continued to increase. Now, like I said, Absalom killed his half-brother, and for 5 years he was exiled by
Right.
David.
Right.
David didn't want him to die, but yet he was fearful of his life, and his other children
Right.
would kill him.
Right.
And so, let things cool down. He sends him off. It's believed, but not for certain, that it was to what is modern-day Syria. And as Absalom was there, he was hatching this plan.
Yeah.
He was hatching this plan
To
all
honor
along
David,
to usurp the throne.
take over the throne.
Absolutely. He, instead of acting with truthfulness and integrity, Absalom chose not to honor David or his wishes, and he, first of all, killed his half-brother against David's wishes, and then went off to this other country and proceeded to concoct a plan where he could take over the kingdom. So David may not have been honorable in his conduct as far as marrying here and marrying there and marrying there, but it was permissible in the society. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to plague you.
What did God tell David whenever Nathan confronted him with his sin and that he was going to have trouble in his life, in his family from then on?
He did.
He said, in fact, he said, you're going to pay fourfold for what you've done for killing Bathsheba's husband, Uriah.
Uriah.
Yeah, so for having him here, you're going to pay for it 4 times.
And you see, they lost the baby.
Right?
He and Bathsheba lost the baby. He has lost
One of his sons, Ammon,
Amnon.
getting ready.
His daughter Tamar is raped.
Right.
Supposedly she went nuts,
Yeah,
whatever.
yes.
And then
See
here
what-
we have Absalom.
Absalom.
So
Absalom is chose not to honor David, but as you said, it didn't give him a right to do that, to honor David. But we should see our parents' sins, Phil, but our parents' sins should help us to stay away from the things they've done wrong. They
Yeah.
should steer us away from the path they've taken. We shouldn't dishonor them because of it, but it should steer us away from the things we see our parents doing wrong.
David's mistakes should have been an example to Absalom. He
Right.
was the oldest living
He
son
was-
that he had.
he
He
was-
was the heir to the throne.
Anyway, you're right.
So what would he gain to kill his father?
Yeah.
It was just a poorly hatched plot, but nevertheless he carried out his plans to take control.
And look out to all the people he involved.
But J.R., how can we honor our parents even when they disappoint us? We know that nobody's perfect, and we see people all around us make mistakes, and the children have a hard time with it. What do we tell a child whose parent has perhaps done something that's dishonorable? How can that child honor their parents?
I wrote some notes on that in the first session there, Phil. When we have someone in our church maybe who is a child who is being mistreated, we do our best, we do everything we can to show them love, show them care, show that we have concern for them. That's one way we can do it, is let Christ, if Christ is not exemplified by their parents, let them see Christ in us. if we have the opportunity to be around them. Now, you have that opportunity more than I do, who never have been around children in any of the workplaces I've been in. You have that opportunity.
And one of the things that I think is so important when dealing with this is not that you sugarcoat anything. Kids are smart.
Yeah, yeah.
Kids are so aware when you're feeding them a line.
Mhm.
And you just have to be honest with them. And you know, you can find ways to honor someone who's made a mistake without condoning the mistake or condemning the person that has made the mistake. In Absalom's case here, he deceptively referred to himself as the king's servant here, didn't he? Now, he's using that deception to hatch his plan. He goes about this, and David thinks he's up and above reproach. And
Don't you think David wants to believe? David wants to believe what Absalom's saying.
he's missed him.
Yeah.
This is his heir to the throne,
Yes.
and he's missed him. He's been in exile 5 years in Syria.
And every time David has an opportunity, he does things to protect Absalom. As you said, he sent him away, probably because he knew that Ammon's family was going to kill him.
And also, Absalom, I'm sure, was getting whispers from his mother's people when he went off in exile, because now his grandfather was the king in that area of Syria.
Yeah.
And so here he's got kings in his lineage both ways.
Yes, yes, yeah.
But because David, I guess, had embarrassed him in this, what he thought was a mercy killing or a vindication of his sister, because of that.
Well, he was upset with David, too, that David didn't do anything to Ammon himself
Right.
because of the rape.
How often we see that?
Yeah.
How often we see that in court? That someone we feel doesn't get the punishment for the crime that they committed. That doesn't mean you can go off and take justice
Take it in your own hands.
into your own hands and take it out. Ammon, though, he does something else wrong here. He invokes the Lord and his intentions. He said he was going to go to Hebron to worship the
Right.
Lord there. That wasn't what was on his mind.
No.
He was going to raise an army.
Yeah.
And
Absalom was going to.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so as Absalom used that, we talked last week about misusing the name of the Lord.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that misusing the name
That's
of the Lord?
exactly misusing
God's
the
not
name.
going to honor that.
No, he's not.
No way to be had.
No.
But
We took 200
They-
soldiers with him. He didn't tell them what they were doing.
and David thought, you know, if he's actually going there to worship, that'll be great,
Yeah.
you know, and he can have whoever of my people, you know, that he needs to go
Right.
and feel safe, and that's what he did. He took 200 vital people, and he gave his permission to go in peace. And that more or less encouraged him that he thought he was doing what he needed to do. And then he's got this plan to announce that he'd become king in Hebron. That move, many Israelites were probably surprised by the news that this had occurred, not knowing that David was sick. Usually when some kind of announcement like that happened, something had happened to
Something
the
happened
former
to the
king.
Right.
And they would assume David had either died or that he had appointed Absalom as his successor because he was the person that was going
Right. He
to be
he
in
would
line
eventually
to
get
take it.
Right. Right.
But instead, Absalom has raised an army. He starts back. What's David do? These people that he had taken out of Israel, they may have appeared to be all all united with Absalom, but some of them, they obviously didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, it says they didn't. They didn't.
They didn't know
They
what
went
he was up
innocently.
to.
Yeah.
So he sent for this advisor, Ahithophel, and had him as a supporter, a staunch supporter, and had him to stir up the people and get behind his ascendancy to the throne. However, he wasn't the only person to join this insurgents. You know, he had a pretty good army.
Yeah.
When he took out.
It looked like to the people that in Hebron that he was legitimate. It was legitimate what was going on probably.
And we see in the next verses that honor seeks the welfare of the parents.
Yep.
Look at that next scripture.
2 Samuel 15, 13, and 14 says, Then an informer came to David and reported, The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. David said to all of his servants with him in Jerusalem, Get up, we have to flee, or we will not escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, or he will overtake us, heap disaster on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Somebody was told on Absalom, didn't he? Somebody was with him, came back and said to David, we're in trouble. Absalom's raised an army, he's declaring himself to be king, and the people are following him. Better run.
David was used to that, wasn't he?
Yeah, David was used to running.
It had been a few years, but he recalled his time with Saul, running from Saul.
But it's kind of funny. It's not funny, but it's odd to me, Phil, that as powerful as David was, he didn't have the whole army with him. Absalom didn't. He had 200 people. That David was so quick to leave.
Do you think he knew how ornery Absalom was in his heart?
Probably. Do you think he did? You think part of the reason he left was because he didn't want to have a conflict with Absalom? He didn't want to have to do what he might have to do.
He didn't want to kill him.
He didn't want to kill him. He'd already proved that over and over when he's protected him in other times.
Well, when David's troops went to war, it wasn't usually good for the other side. There was a lot of killing going on.
That's right. That's what. Yeah.
He probably knew that Absalom wouldn't stand a chance against his army.
Yeah. I look back at some verses that the writer said something about Ezekiel, Kings, Phil, and Elisha, and something that happened to the prophet there. When God tells us to honor our parents, our spiritual leaders, or anybody God tells us to honor, we better honor them, haven't we? Because if you remember the story of Elisha was a prophet to Israel.
Yeah.
And he was walking down the road one day, and this bunch of young guys came out and started making fun of him, calling him baldy, and said, Go home, get out of here.
Old bald head.
Get here, you old bald head. What happened? 2 bears came out of the woods and killed 42 of them.
I think,
Huh?
and it's a common thread as you go through the Bible. You just don't do that.
I talk, you don't talk as much about it as I do, but I talk all the time, not all the time, a lot of times about the fear of God. We better fear God. We better fear God in doing and try to do as best we can what he tells us to do.
Do you think Absalom feared God?
No, he didn't fear
You
God, he
think
didn't fear
of it.
David, didn't fear anybody.
He didn't fear nobody. His grandpa was king in another kingdom.
Yeah.
His father's king in this kingdom.
Yep.
He was the heir to the throne. He felt righteous in what he had done.
Yeah.
His pursuit of justice was carried out in spite of David's wishes. And I think David knew the depth of his hatred. And from him murdering Amnon after he told him not to, he very well knew the depth of this insurgency and knew that he was in trouble,
He was next to be
that he
killed.
needed to get out of there and preserve his life and those around him.
Yes.
He knew that if there was a battle that come, it was going to be bloody. But he had not had any time to prepare for it. Absalom had 5 years to prepare for this takeover.
Of course, I guess the rest of the story, Phil, would be what happened after that. David left the city of Jerusalem because I think he wanted to keep from having to do something with Absalom he didn't want to do. Went across the Jordan River, east of the Jordan River, got on a hillside where they could defend this hill real easy, I guess, and here comes Absalom and his guys. And what did David tell the troops before he sent them into battle?
He said, "Be gentle with Absalom.
Treat him kindly.
Treat him kindly.
Beat him. Treat him
Now,
gently.
that's a father and a son, isn't it? Is it? You know, I can beat his rear end, but don't you do nothing
Don't you
to
dare
him."
touch him. That's exactly right.
And some of that had to occur throughout Absalom's life, or he wouldn't have felt so privileged that
I think he knew that.
that
Yeah,
he
he-
could do some of this
yeah,
stuff. And David enabled him to
Yeah.
become the man that he had.
Yeah.
Another of David's failings, but yet he still deserved honor. He
Yes,
didn't deserve
yes,
what was
yes.
coming.
And as the story plays out, Absalom was killed, but Absalom's hair got hung in a tree limb, and he drug him off his mule, it says, and Joab, I think it was, came up and slayed him. He said, and he went back and told David, I had to do it. You didn't want me to, but I had to do it, and David was okay with it. You need to act like a king.
Well, he said he was okay with it, but he promised not to ever take vengeance out on Joab. But as soon as Solomon took over,
Joab was-
vengeance came,
Yeah.
and Joab bit the dust.
Yeah.
So it don't play to cross a parent
Right.
with dishonor, does it?
I wrote a note here that said that sadly today, many children are dying spiritually, emotionally, and relationally because they have not learned from their parents the importance of honor. We haven't seen our parents honor their parents or anybody else or anything else in society, Phil. There's no honor being shown today. And if we don't see that from our parents, then our children don't see it from us.
That's true.
And
That's true.
we need to honor.
And we look at people who we think are honorable. Tom and Nancy, this is another little story. Tom and Nancy met and were married, lived over in Washington County, and moved to E-Town, and he was a carpenter there. Well, he couldn't make a living carpenter.
Okay.
They started having kids, and they moved to Hodgenville, bought a farm down there, and then before long they bought another farm on out towards past White City, and then they got moved from it, and then 4 years they moved 4 times. Also in those 4 years they had 3 children. And Sarah and Abraham and Thomas. And one of the children, Thomas, died. At each stop, you'd talked about it earlier, how parents having children in church was important in this cycle of things. And we've talked about the breakdown of the family. With a child dying, having 3 children in 4 years, they lost 3 farms.
3 farms.
Lost 3 farms. And Thomas decides to go to Indiana. And his wife, Nancy, picked the children up, scrapped together what little they had, and off to Indiana they went. And the middle child honored his parents. The middle child, Abraham, was Abraham Lincoln. And he honored his parents. He said one time, he said, "God bless my mother." He said, all that I ever am or ever hope to be is because of my mother. And I could say the same thing. You know, she was the rock in that family. She was the rock. It's important how we teach our kids, and we teach them to honor those that have gone on before.
And we teach them that by honoring those that have gone on before us. And they
Absolutely.
see us honor our parents, they will want to honor us and others that they come in contact with. Great lesson.
Yeah.
Honor
Fun.
your mother and your father. And
Fun.
it goes beyond the mother and father. Honor your family,
Yeah.
your Christians' family. A great lesson in the fifth commandment. And we're going to move on with more commandments in the next few weeks. Continue on with this study. I think Brenda had a treatment this week and everything went well with that. Linda Winfrey's gotten a good report from her
Good. Good.
situation. I'm sure there are others that are we know that Juanita and Bill, I always remember them, Jess, and there's others, Rock and John Rock and Jeff Ramsey. I knew the Jeffs and Johns.
Also remember Kristen Lay
Okay.
and Kenny. They're expecting a child here
Okay,
very shortly.
okay.
Next couple of weeks, maybe 3. So we'll remember them.
Very good. Don't forget diapers, newborn diapers for Clarity this month. If you have ability to give some by there to them or bring it by here to the church, we'll be fine, or give a donation. That'll get to the right spot.
Yep.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.